The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hi, this is Rob Benedict.
And I am Richard Spate. We were both on a little show you might know called Supernatural.
It had a pretty good run, 15 seasons, 327 episodes.
And though we have seen, of course, every episode many times, we figured, hey, now that we're wrapped, let's watch it all again.
And we can't do that alone, so we're inviting the cast and crew that made the show along for the ride. We've got writers, producers, composers, directors, and we'll of course have some actors on as well, including some certain guys that played some certain pretty iconic brothers.
It was kind of a little bit of a left field choice in the best way possible.
The note from Kripke was, he's great, we love him, but we're looking for like a really intelligent Duchovny type.
With 15 seasons to explore, it's going to be the road trip of several lifetimes. So please join us and subscribe to Supernatural then and now.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and this is part 4 of Hortense Mancini. Now, as per ever, if this is the first episode you've ever listened to of Vulgar History, welcome, etc. I do recommend you might want to listen to parts 1 through 3 first, just to understand what's going on. But at the same time, these are each episode has its own sort of plot we're talking about. So I feel like you probably could jump in. If you're the sort of person who just likes to jump into random podcast episodes, do that too. But I do think listening to the whole thing will make it a bit more sense to you in context. For instance, I don't even remember what the name is of Hortense's horrible husband. All my notes at this point from episode 1 on just say AC, which is what we're going to call him. Forget what his name is. He doesn't deserve a name. So my major sources, as per the last few episodes, are the two books. So Mistresses, Sex and Scandal at the Court of Charles II by Linda Porter, and The King's Mistresses, The Liberated Lives of Marie Mancini, Princess Colonna, and her sister Hortense, Duchess Mazarin by Elizabeth C. Goldsmith. So I read an article from theguardian.com, which is about Hortense, and a lot of that is an interview with Annalisa Nicholson, who is a researcher in French studies at Cambridge University, who's doing, or maybe has completed, her PhD about Hortense Mancini. And then I also got information from an article from winemag.com. But again, that's also an interview with Annalisa Nicholson. And then also an interview with Annalisa Nicholson from the Cambridge Language Collective.com. Also some information direct from Annalisa Nicholson, who I emailed to ask some questions, and she was fabulous enough to answer. So She has not yet published a book about Hortense Mancini, but she's like the person who knows the most about her in existence on the planet, I'm pretty sure. So, last time was kind of setting the scene, what's going on in London, in England. Charles II is the king. What does that mean? Finally, so Hortense, everything's catching up to each other. The two plotlines coinciding, like a late season episode of Westworld. So Hortense is in England. We're going to get into how she and Charles reconnected and what that meant for her life. Two people were writing letters with Hortense that sort of encouraged her to come to London. One of them was Ralph Montague. So in the Linda Porter biography, she describes Ralph Montague as the arch intriguer, which I presume means messy bitch who lives for drama. So we talked about this a ton last time, but Charles II had mistresses, and the mistresses kind of all had either their own family or other people who were sort of like supporting them, and they wanted the mistresses to sort of be close to the king and give him a certain point of view. And so Ralph Montague wanted in on that. He wanted to be able to influence the king by putting a mistress there who reported back to him. And he thought Hortense could be useful for him as a pawn. But guess what, Ralph Montague? Hortense was used like a pawn when she was married, aged 14, to her stalker. It had been, 17 years since then, and she is no longer willing to just bat her eyes and do what she's told. Not that she ever really was. Like, she had been traveling around Europe being amazing for basically a decade. She had her own plans, but Ralph kind of oversaw her getting there, meeting Charles. So, thank you, Ralph. She arrived on a rainy day in December 1675. So she arrived in London on horseback and in sodden men's attire. I think we talked about that last time. She arrived on like a postal horse or something. She's wearing a long cloak, and people thought that they didn't realize that it was even a woman, let alone Hortense. I'm going to tell you what this guy said, and I'm going to explain what it means because I had no idea. So the French ambassador, when he was writing about her arrival, because remember, although she lived in France from ages, 6 till 20. So she's effectively a French person, although she had been born in Italy. But she was not here to represent French interests, and that was kind of why Ralph Montague wanted her. The other mistress, Louise, was doing that. And I'm just like, I talked to you about that last time, didn't I? Yeah, no, I told you about Louise last time. Anyway, Ralph Montague wanted her there to be sort of like arguing not like an anti-French sort of person. And to be sure, Hortense was not a fan of Louis XIV because of how he kept not helping her separate from AC. So the new French ambassador, all of which to say, was a hater. He was not excited to have Hortense there. He was not happy about it. And so he said that she arrived on horseback in sodden men's attire. And he said that she entered the English court like Armida entered Godefroy's camp. So if you're like, who is Armida and also who is Godefroy and what is Godefroy's camp? There was a book or a play, I didn't write it down, called Jerusalem Delivered, which was like a popular story that like lots of people knew at this time. So it's written by Torquato Tasso. So it's, I think it's a book or like an epic poem or whatever about the Crusaders. And it's all like, it's a made up fictional story. So a woman called Armida is an enchantress, and she enters the camp of Godefroy, who is like the hero of that story. So Armida enters and she seduces the Crusaders and persuades them to convert. So effectively, this hater is saying that Hortense Mancini entered the English court like this enchantress who's there to sort of like seduce everybody into changing their allegiances. What that really means is that everyone knew she hated the French king, everyone knew she was gorgeous, and people were just worried that she was in town and she's going to seduce Charles and diminish his pro-French agenda, which is not what the French people wanted to occur. The other person she'd been corresponding with was Mary of Modena, who was her cousin's daughter. So Mary of Modena was not apparently as gorgeous as her mother. Remember, her mother was one of the Mazarinets. Mary of Modena was like daughter of a Mazarinette, but she was cute and she was pleasant. She had gotten married at age 15 to James. So at this point, there's the king, who's Charles II, sexy young Captain Hook. His brother is James, and James is the heir because Charles has not had any legitimate children, although he's had numerous illegitimate children. Anyway, so Mary of Modena had wanted to join a convent, apparently, and not be child bride to a stranger. But she did what she was told. And James was, my notes here say, an okay husband to her, even as he had numerous affairs, but that's just what things were like. And like, he was basically fine to her, like on a scale of like AC to whatever, like James was like, okay. So he had 2 daughters who we know from the Anne the First episode. Anne the First from The Favorite is her full name. He had daughters who were Mary from William and Mary, who became later the King and Queen of England after they like, spoiler, like usurped the throne from James. And then Anne. Anyway, so Mary and Anne were both like, I think around Mary of Modina's age, or maybe they were a bit older. They were not super thrilled with this teenager being their new stepmother. Anyway, that's all back in the Anne the First episode if you want to re-listen to that from a couple seasons ago. So Mary of Modena was lonely. Mary was also, well, she was lonely because she was like French and Catholic. She was maybe going to be the next Queen of England because her husband was the heir because Charles didn't have any legitimate children. And so all the people who didn't like French people didn't like her either. So she'd been writing with Hortense being like, can you just come over here and like we can hang out, we can be friends. I would imagine Hortense maybe saw in Mary some of what happened to her, being married off age 14, 15 and being sort of like isolated. So Mary was, of course, at this time, I think she was 17 and she was pregnant. Anyway, so she'd been corresponding with Ralph Montague was like, if you come to London, there's like so many French people here now, which there were, because for various political reasons, a lot of the French, I think the Protestants, the Huguenots, which is potentially pronounced Huguenots, had all been fleeing because Protestants were not having a good time in France. Anyway, so there was like a whole French expat community, and Ralph and Mary were like, Hortense, like just come and like hang out here. / also being in England meant she was far, far away from AC's unrelenting Terminator T-1000 nonstop attempts to force her to come back and be his like wife again. Hortense stayed at the royal court, so she was like often at the bedside of, I'm just going to call Mary of Modena her cousin because it's her cousin's daughter. Anyway, so she was staying at Mary's bedside during her sitting in, which I think is a period of time like before you have the baby, like around when you have the baby. Like I'm sure Mary loved the company. Hortense could also be like, hey, I know what it's like to have a baby when you're a teenager because you might have forgotten, but this is going to come up in a bit. Hortense had 4 children with AC, who she had left behind in France. And her oldest daughter was a similar age to Mary of Modena. So she might have seen a bit of herself in her. She might have imagined like, maybe this is like what my daughter is like. Charles also, the king, Charles, sexy Captain Hook, also visited frequently the bedside of Mary of Modena. So like, of course, these two like saw each other. They reconnected. So she had arrived in London, like Armida at Godefroy's camp on New Year's Eve. And by the end of January, so like 1 month later, Charles had already sent a request to Louis XIV that Hortense should be provided with more income worthy of her station. By that point, I don't know if they were lovers, but like he was clearly like there for Hortense and wanted to help her out as best he could. Louis refused, and Charles himself began providing her with an allowance. So at that point, it's probably like, okay, she's probably a mistress because he gave his mistresses allowances. That was just kind of like a thing he did. Hortense and Charles, and at this point, I don't even know if they like had actually met each other 17 years ago when she was on the marriage market, and he had approached Mazarin to see if like he could marry Hortense, but like they had almost gotten together then, and then now they're reconnecting again after 17 years, literally the period of time between J-Lo and Ben Affleck's 2 engagements, and now they're married. So, it's a very like J-Lo, Ben Affleck / Jane Austen's Persuasion situation of like 2 former kind of lovers like reuniting. Later, they're a bit older, they're a bit wiser. Hortense was staying at St. James's Palace with Mary, who like had her baby by now, and her husband James. Everybody got along, which is nice. Shortly after she arrived, James bought a house next door. And so then he offered that Hortense could stay there with her household, so like her servants. She had arrived with like not lots of servants, but like some of them. Past people, we've talked about Nanon, who I think is definitely in the running for the Lady Jane Seymour supporting character award, because Nanon is just always there with her. Although I have to say she is a servant. I'm not sure what other options she has, but Nanon has been with her ever since the first escape in pants. Mustafa is also there, the young black man who, wasn't he like someone gave him to her as a gift at some point. Anyway, so the whole squad moved in, along with her growing collection of pets, which included hunting dogs and exotic parrots, which reminds me of Catherine Gray, who had all the pets and monkeys and things. At her house, her house quickly became like Hortense's Salon. She entertained lots of visitors, mostly men, at this house where she maintained an open household. So usually in this era for people like her, you'd just be like, if you think of, I don't know, Bridgerton or Downton Abbey or whatever, it's like someone comes at a certain time. You're like, Lord and Lady so-and-so are here. Like you invite people to come over at various times, but she just had an open door policy. Visitors were always welcome day or night. People could even just come by and find a quiet corner of the library just to read a book. Like they didn't even have to hang out with her. It's just her door was always open door policy. And this confused and fascinated people because that was not the English way. This was, of course, the French way. This was modeled after the French practice of just people hanging out and having fun together. And we're going to talk a lot more about what all happened at Hortense's Salon in a bit. But just bear in mind, that's what she's doing. So she has this house that's her salon, but then she also is given apartments at Whitehall, which is the king's residence, which is where the same apartments where Barbara Villiers used to live, which is where we're like, okay, she's now the mistress. So the person who was most recently mistress before her was Louise, who is still around, but not excited about being ousted for Hortense. Louise, it seems like she wound up befriending Hortense just because that was the best way to save face and to not seem bitter or angry about it and to figure out her next move. But as usual, Hortense didn't give two shits about the haters and just set about having a nice time. She was 29 years old. She'd gone from child bride to a stalker to fugitive to finally maybe being able to settle somewhere and just live her life like she wanted it to. And what she wanted to live life was Hortense's Salon, and that is what she did. She was also the lover, or the mistress, the official mistress of Charles, who was the king. Nobody in this story is monogamous. I just want to note that, and that's kind of not a secret, and everyone's kind of cool with it. Her bestie, who we're going to talk about later, a lot of the information we know about her were from the writings of this person who became her friend, who mentioned that Hortense had lovers, I think he described it, of both genders. I would describe it as of all genders. So she was noted bisexual, and she just had various lovers, and so did Charles, and everyone's just cool with it because that's just what's going on. Here we go. So because of her known or strongly suspected bisexuality, which again, in a Christine of Sweden moment, a lot of it tends to dwell on the fact that she sometimes wore pants, which is anyone can wear pants. Doesn't necessarily speak to your gender or your sexuality. But anyway, she was this bisexual icon wearing pants sometimes, which lends this sort of air of sexuality to all of the people who she was friends with. And one of the people she was friends with was a person named Anne, the Countess of Sussex, who was actually Barbara Villiers' daughter by Charles. So Anne, Countess of Sussex, daughter of Hortense's lover, Charles. Anne's mother, Barbara Villiers, one of Hortense's sort of frenemies there. Anyway, so she's just this young girl who again is similar age to Hortense's oldest daughter. These two started hanging out with each other. And Anne had been recently married to a guy named Thomas. So we're talking about a 14-year-old and a 30-year-old, two female people hanging out. But bear in mind that the 14-year-old was married because that was a thing that happened. Anyway, Anne's husband Thomas liked being out on the countryside, but Anne, like Hortense, preferred royal court. She liked being in the city more, so fundamentally incompatible people. Anne was enchanted by Hortense, like everybody, because she had this superpower / curse that everybody who met her became entranced by her. And so these two had enough of a friendship that it kind of got people talking about it. So when you, I have been, look at various sources about information about Hortense and her life and what was scandalous about her, Anne is often mentioned as one of her lesbian lovers. Was she? How would you confirm that? I don't know. However you would confirm that, it has not been confirmed. So this is a question that I asked Annalisa Nicholson because I was curious about it. because of the age thing. Also, so Hortense also had been maybe in a sexual and or romantic relationship with Marie Sidonie de Courcelles back when she was in like the first convent she was staying in. And there's a thing that like, were they lovers? So it's, I don't know, it's like backwards evidence where it's like, we know that Hortense was bisexual. We know that she had lovers who were women. That sort of recasts, knowing that people look back at the people she hung out with and assume that she was lovers of all of them, which is like the reverse Christina of Sweden, where it's like, there's people who Christina, like we know that she was not into having sex, then we assume that she didn't have sex with anybody. So it's all God knows. Anyway, here's what Annalisa Nicholson, Hortense Mancini scholar, she notes that they clearly had a very close relationship. So their antics were drawing attention and outrage. So this included stuff like Hortense taught her about how to hunt, which was Hortense's favorite hobby. That's why she's always being drawn as Diana, goddess of the hunt. They took fencing lessons together. And so the thing that always keeps coming up is like at one point they went outside like in the middle of the night in their nightgowns and they were practicing fencing in the evening in their nightgowns at St. James's Park. So like the Royal Palace area, and everyone was just like, that was like the most scandalous thing in the world, which to me is like, okay, but like this was really, really distressing to a lot of people. I don't know. I don't know if there's an element, even if whether they were lovers or not, I do suspect there's an element of like cool older sister. Hortense might have seen, again, like her young self. She might have thought like Anna's like similar age to her own daughter. Like maybe this is like how she would have acted with her own daughter. Anyway, at one point, Anne's husband, Thomas, so his reaction was so extreme. Her husband, Thomas, just found their antics so outrageous. So even if it wasn't sexual, like he still was like, there was intense speculation about the relationship. Her husband had Anne sent to France to like, he sent her off to like live in a convent forcibly, which is just like what terrible husbands were doing to lots of people at this time. So yeah, she was forcibly removed from Hortense's household and sent to France to be incarcerated in a convent. So something was going on. Clearly their behavior together, combined with the reaction of Anne's husband, revealed that it was a relationship that bordered on outrageous, even if it wasn't actually sexual. Like something doesn't need to be sexual to be intense or shocking or even romantic. And then in like, okay, there's going to be a lot of multi-generational dating of people here that makes me think of like Days of Our Lives or something, where it's just kind of like, you know, somebody could have, just the different generations of people, and you're just kind of like, we're okay with it. There were a lot of people who were just okay with it. So like people would have an affair with, for instance, like potentially Hortense was having an affair with Charles and then also with his daughter. But then other people were just kind of, Ralph Montague, for instance, later had an affair with Anne. I think he was the one who went and rescued her from France. He was an adult man. She was a teenager. There were just a lot of people. I don't know. It's kind of like, Annalisa describes this as like, some of these restoration courtiers were less concerned by things like sexual pasts and histories, age gaps, and family relationships of their lovers. So like, let's just get over that hurdle, I guess, because that's what's going to be happening. Just a lot of people having sexual relationships and or intense, outrageous, non-sexual relationships with people of various ages. So another one of Hortense's known lovers, like she had lots of other lovers too, presumably, was Prince Louis I of Monaco, who came to England for a visit. I don't know if he came because he heard Hortense was there. At this point, that would not surprise me because her reputation was so exciting. He fell in love with her like all men did, and he was very messy and dramatic about it. He threatened to leave England out of despair for how much he loved her, and she took pity on him, is how it was described in a letter by her bestie. He began to encourage his overtures and persuaded him to stay, which was a bad idea. And in fact, her best friend was telling her, please don't do this. But Hortense has, and we're going to see this more and more, a bit of a self-destructive or not destructive, but just like, what's it called when you like are just not making things easy for yourself on purpose? I guess self-destructive. I don't know, self-non-helpfulness. But the thing is, like, yeah, she's taking lots of lovers. Charles is taking lots of lovers. Like, everyone's sleeping with everyone. And Charles was famously not jealous. Like, Barbara Villiers, for instance, had other lovers and he didn't care. Like, he's cool with it. Like, it's just like a polyamory situation and let's go. But yeah, Charles was cool with the situation because he knew that Hortense and the Prince of Monaco weren't like a serious thing. He was like her primary partner, I guess. But it started to make Charles look bad. Like, as word started to spread that she was sleeping with this other royal, he was not cool with people like making fun of him for it. We know what happened next because do you know who else showed up in London? Is former friend, potentially lover, and ongoing hater, Marie Sidonie is in London now. She fled her husband again. For some reason, just like a lot of women were fleeing their husbands and coming to England, and that's just what was going on. Marie Sidonie, just like professionally, I don't know. I don't want to use the term stalker lightly. AC was an obsessive stalker of Hortense. Marie Sidonie is just like a hater. So she wrote how foolish Hortense was to relinquish her role as official mistress to the English king in favor for an affair with a visiting nobleman of little consequence. She assumed, because she just was a hater and wanted to see Hortense fail, she assumed that Hortense would have no choice but to return to France. Marie Sidonie wrote, Hortense is even more unhappy than I and sees no one. So she was assuming, like other people did, that Hortense would maybe be cut off by Charles financially and then have nowhere else to go. And yeah, so Charles cut off much of Hortense's allowance because she was no longer his main official mistress. I'm guessing she didn't live in those fancy apartments anymore, but he was a cool ex. He kept giving her enough funds so that she could stay living in the little house in St. James, so the Salon could keep going, so she was okay to stay in London. Like, this is a conscious uncoupling. They just kind of like ended their sexual affair and like life goes on. And that's where it's so fascinating to me that so much of the sort of casual writing about Hortense is like, and she was the mistress of Charles II. It's like, yeah, I just talked about that for actively 10 minutes. Like, that was one of like 750 interesting things that she did, and it's not even in the top 10. Anyway, yeah, so she is in London. She's no longer the official mistress of the king. And yeah, so life settled into a new normal. Part of this new normal, like for them, I mean, like things in London were kind of like still a little tense with the whole like Protestant Catholic thing. So there was a alleged Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Charles, during which 15 people were tried and executed, even though it wasn't even a real plot. It was just someone was like pretending like it was a plot. Hortense got caught up in this, I think, just because she was a notable person on the scene. But like, I think we all know that she was apolitical. She was not getting into any of the like lobbying stuff, like much to the annoyance of Ralph Montague, who like brought her there so she would meddle with the king and what he thought. Anyway, Hortense was like maybe accused in this, but Charles was like, she's cool. And everyone's like, okay. Among those who were tried and executed was the secretary of her cousin, Mary of Modena. Not Mary herself, but Mary of Modena's secretary. So this was getting a little too close for comfort for Hortense. She's just like, should I move on? She's like, maybe, should I leave London? She was back in contact with her sister, Marie, who we're going to like do a whole catch up with all the other Mazarinets and what they were up to. Like, you will learn the rest of Marie's story in another episode. Maybe next week, depends how much I get through today. Anyway, at this point, Maria was living in a convent in Madrid, and Hortense considered going there to hang out with her, but ultimately she remained in London, and that was partially because her bestie convinced her that that was the best option, and now I will reveal the identity. I didn't mean to not reveal the identity, it's just I didn't have the name written in my notes until now. So her new best friend is Charles de Marguetel de Saint-Denis, seigneur de Saint-Évremond. So his name is Charles de Marguetel. We're going to call him CM for simplicity's sake. And he's kind of like Azzolino was to Christina, CM is to Hortense. He's just like a guy who's probably not her lover, but who just like is there for her and helps out. So who is CM? He was from France. He had been raised to be, he was like 30 years older than her. So she's like 30, he's like 60-ish. He had been raised to be like a scholar sort of person, but his passion was for fencing, and he would not let anything get in the way of his passion for fencing. So he abandoned his studies and entered the army, or presumably, so he could have access to a sword. He was known for his good manners and his clever wit, and being a good swordsman, I assume. So his clever wit, this reminds me of like Cyrano from Cyrano de Bergerac, who is like also known for being witty, but sometimes it got him in trouble. He like cracked a few jokes. He got like a bit too glib about it. So eventually what happened with CM, I'm glossing over a lot, but just the bits you need to know. He insulted the wrong people in one of his like sarcastic comments, like the king, or he might have, I'm not sure if it was Richelieu or Mazarin at this, I think it was Mazarin. Anyway, he's going to be thrown in the Bastille just for like being an asshole. So he fled to Normandy to avoid prison time, then to Holland, and then to England, where eventually Charles II invited him to live permanently, which interestingly, you would think he would speak English, being a permanent resident in England, but no, apparently he just never learned, which probably made things kind of lonely for him. So he was excited when all these French people started coming. He was, because of his great wit, he's known as a writer, philosopher, poet, diplomat. And then Hortense showed up and he was like, oh my God, such a fan. We vibe together. Like, here's my new best friend. And she's like, do it. Yeah, bet. So CM was a big fan of being friends with scandalous people. He just liked interesting people. So he's obviously drawn to Hortense. When they first met, she was 29 and he was 62. And he knew he did not have a chance to sleep with her. Like, he knew she was out of his league. And so he was happy to just be her pal, which I love for her. I love her having just a legitimate man friend. Like, her brother Philippe was this to her, but it's like so many people just saw her, like, I keep thinking of like Marilyn Monroe or something, like people just saw her for her like sex appeal or whatever, but it's like, no, she's a cool person, be her friend. And this guy did. So they both missed their days back in French court. So they like reminisce about like missing how things used to be. They probably had fun making fun of English people together. Like they were kind of kindred spirits. So he advised her how to act in London culture, a lot of which she didn't listen to because she was just going to do her own thing. And he would just be like, oh, that Hortense. He wasn't like mad about it. He was just kind of like indulgent, kind of like a sweet grandpa type person. Yeah, part of what they might have gone along with was he was like exiled from France for making fun of her uncle, who she hated, Cardinal Mazarin. He probably enjoyed the part of her memoir where she said her feelings about the death of Cardinal Mazarin were, thank God he's croaked. They could probably bond over that as well. Even though they saw each other constantly, they also wrote letters to each other all the time, thank God, because that's how we know a lot of stuff we know about Hortense, because it's in CM's letters. He would talk about what she did and what she was doing, and he's like a fairly trustworthy source. So at one point, CM, like Louis, gave him permission to return to France, and he was like, thanks, but no thanks. I'm like cool here in London. He wrote, quote, in the country in which I now am, I see Madame Mazarin every day. I live among people who are sociable and friendly, who have great cleverness and much wit. Like, he was cool. He also, like, he saw that people were trying to get Hortense to, like, take his side in various political dramas, but he was just like, he knew that she was too much of a free spirit to give a shit about that. Like, he knew that she just was not interested in being a spy or a diplomat. Like, she was truly, I keep thinking of Drew Barrymore as well. Like, she was just a free spirit. Like, again, had kind of, well, an incredibly fucked up, traumatic teenage years. The 20s were also pretty chaotic. And then as she settled into this new life, she was just kind of like, I'm here for good time. Like, you know, let's just like laugh and dance in the rain. Let's go sword fight under moonlight and nightgowns. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a co-founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. During her journey, Isla meets new friends, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and learns valuable life lessons with every quest, sword fight, and dragon ride. Positive and uplifting stories remind us all about the importance of kindness, friendship, honesty, and positivity. Join me and an all-star cast of actors including Liam Neeson, Emily Blunt, Kristen Bell, Chris Hemsworth, among many others, in welcoming the Search for the Silver Lining podcast to the Go Kid Go network by listening today. Look for the Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back. CM was a big fan of the book Don Quixote, the Spanish book. And so the main character in Don Quixote is Don Quixote. But Don Quixote loves a woman called Dulcinea. So CM referred to Hortense as his Dulcinea. She signed her letters to him as Dulcinea to Don Quixote. And he signed his letters to her with to Dulcinea from the sad face knight. Like, so cute. And yeah, so Louis, the Prince of Monaco, came to town on a visit. Hortense flirted with him. CM was like, girl, don't do it. But like, he knew she would. She knew she would. And obviously, she did. Yeah, so the king dumped her because of that, as we discussed. After this, Hortense, for a while, made a show of devout repentance, like to try and just reputation repair, but also maybe, like, remember when she was in Savoy, she also was just like sitting, reading, contemplating, like she was taking some time for herself to be like, why did I just self-destruct my life in this manner? Hortense, what are we doing? But her main thing that she did in London was run Hortense's Salon. So this is so major. I actually added I added a new design to the merch shop, vulgarhistory.store. Use code TITSOUT10 for 10% off, or TITSOUT for free US shipping. Anyway, I made a shirt that says Hortense Salon Internationale, established 1675, because her salon was the place to be. So, who went to the salon chez Hortense Internationale? So, remember London or England at this time? It's called the Restoration. It's the era of like the restoration of the monarchy, but also the restoration of like fun after Oliver Cromwell. So it was a time with a lot of flourishing artistic, scientific, literary stuff going on. So writers, philosophers, scientists, and artists, as well as the growing expatriate community, French immigrants, and I guess other place immigrants, flocked to the doors of this of the salon, her house where she lived in. So a thing happened in France in 1685, which led to the exodus of more than 200,000 Protestant refugees, many of whom came to London. So there's just like a whole lot of French people there. And it's kind of like, I don't know, like Chinatown in San Francisco or something. It's like if a bunch of people all come from one country to another country, then they enjoy being together, so they can like continue like discussing stuff from where they're from. So like this group, the Francophiles, would discuss the latest French play or culinary trend, and we're gonna get to that. It's very multilingual, This is why I think of it as the Salon Internationale, which ties in so well to this season, etc. Like there'll be different conversations happening, different languages, and people, not CM, but other people presumably like learning languages or like learning new phrases. And so there's also like a whole Catholic Protestant thing happening because these 200,000 Protestants all fled France, but Hortense is a Catholic. So people are just kind of like all different religions, like all different points of view all together in one room. Like, so although we think about oldie times, especially these periods of like religious wars and stuff, is kind of like us versus them, like nobody getting along. Like this is a place where people get together and talk about books and science. And it's like Christina of Sweden wishes. This is like what Christina of Sweden thought she was assembling, but she was so strict about who could enter and she didn't let women in. And that's a crucial part of the success because women didn't have a space to talk about intellectual things and to socialize because they were excluded from other spheres where you might do this, like, you know, universities and stuff like that. So this is a place where no matter your gender, your religion, whatever, you can just, if you want to like have some like artistic talk and also just like have a good time, Hortense's Salon is the place to do it. Prior to Hortense's Salon, other people had tried to set up this sort of thing in England. Like people who had been to France or other places where there were salons like wanted this to happen, but it just kept not happening. They didn't take off, and that was largely because for this situation to thrive, you needed to have not just men there. Although women couldn't attend universities, this was a place where they could engage and learn about the latest scientific breakthroughs and things. And also just like having women there, having it be not just all men, made it appealing in a different way than just like, I don't know, whatever university group. Like you'd have different points of view, like different people with different lived experiences. And the salon was also the place to see and to be seen. Like it was in the house next door to where James and Mary of Modena lived. And like Charles, who kept a cool relationship with his exes, he would come there and hang out sometimes. The other mistresses, current and past, would go there. Like Barbara Villiers hung out there. Nell Gwynn is known to have gone, accompanied by Aphra Behn, who was, again, the writer/spy, who Nell was patron of. Aphra Behn would later dedicate a novella to Hortense, and Aphra Behn may be one of Hortense's lovers as well. Moll Davis, the former royal mistress, also went. It's likely this is where she met her husband, Jacques Paisible, who was a musician who performed at the Salon. Even Louise de Keroualle hung out there sometimes. Like, it's just like I don't know. I am not enough in tune with current, Carbone, is that what it's called? The restaurant in New York that I was talking about on Dumois. Like, what's the place? It's like, if you watch The Hills back in the day, like Les Deux is like where all the most important people were all at the Salon. And it wasn't just like people sitting around talking about like important science literary things. They're also doing gambling. So Hortense, I'd mentioned it, seeding this plot line. So when she was in Savoy, she had learned the card game Basset. To recap, this is the purely chance-based game that always skewed in the banker's favor with high wins and high losses. It was very addicting, and actually it was so addicting and so hazardous, it was eventually outlawed in France in 1691. But this is not that year, and also we're in London, not in France. If there's ever a vulgar history, like in-person con, I feel like we can have like a Basset table and we can get down. So Hortense was one of the first gambling hostesses in Europe, and everything she did became so popular. Like even when she was when she went to Italy, people were like, ooh, look at her like French outfits. Like people were painting her and stuff. Like she just had this knack. She was like the it girl. She was the original it girl. Like everything she did became a trend. And she started a gambling salon that women could go to. And suddenly this became a trend to have gaming, like casinos presided over by women. So yeah, Basset was just a different form of entertainment besides the usual conversation. There was also performances that went on there, like people, I guess they would do plays, like musicians and singers would perform. But yeah, around the gambling table, like the same way that it was the Salon Internationale, it's like all different genders were there, different religions represented, different languages being spoken. Like, no matter your gender, your rank, your nationality, like, everyone would just sit around the table and just, like, have fun playing this extremely addictive game where you lost money frequently. And also, like, usually up to this point in general in London, gambling places have been just for men. But here it's like men and women, at least around this table, were basically equals, and women were able to make independent financial decisions in the form of how much they're going to bet and stuff like that. So it's like a different kind of influence on understandings of like gender equity and women's rights. So often discussions of women's rights are just like about owning property and about being able to vote, or like with Hortense being able to like end a bad marriage. And those are all important, obviously, but this was a place I like this kind of informal way that it just kind of like would unconsciously maybe make people think like, oh yeah, men and women maybe are not, so can sit around a table. They can like, there doesn't have to be this disconnect or this sort of like unequal treatment. And so women, like, again, the whole thing about like money and being able to make decisions about money. So like, even for someone like Hortense or Nell Gwyn, like Louise Carroy, whatever, like for the royal mistresses, like they were dependent on the money that Charles was giving them. Like they were not able to get another job. Like Hortense's whole deal since she fled AC was like she needed to rely on the kindness of strangers, generally strange men, to give her a home, to give her money. Like she wasn't allowed to get a job. Like that, it's not just like she couldn't get a job. It's like there wasn't jobs women like that she would have been able to do. But in gambling, she's able to take some control over her money, at least the illusion of complete financial authority. Although if it's her salon and it tends like if the house always wins, then she's making money off of other people. So, it's a good grift. And yeah, the royal mistresses hung out at the salon. They may have even been friends because, like, I don't know, there's like a lot of what's known about the royal mistresses is like they're quarreling with each other. Like there's one time one of them put laxatives in one of the other's drinks before the other one was having a date with Charles, so that the one could have the date with Charles and the other one would be ruined. Like there's a lot of like quarreling that's talked about with them, but also like they could hang out too. It's a funny thing. Like there's this small group of people, the courtiers and stuff, who are just always like the fact that Charles just kind of cycles through these mistresses and stuff. It's like, I don't know, like a TV show or whatever that takes place in a high school where it's like, yeah, all these people are having all these dramatic situations, but like you still have to all go to English class tomorrow. And then like you might have to do a group assignment together. Like they're all in each other's worlds. And so there was fighting and rivalries and stuff, but they were also like friends in some ways. And the salon was like, it's like Sweet Valley High. That's what I was thinking of. It's like Sweet Valley High. So like people are sometimes rivals and sometimes friends, but like you all get together when there's a big dance. Oh, also at the salon, and like all of this info about the salon is from the interviews that I read with Annalisa Nicholson giving information. I really don't want to like not credit her enough because she's been like doing the work on this, and I'm just here sharing highlights of it with you. Like, thank goodness for people like that who find all these interesting facts that people don't know about. Like, this is so important to learn about. The salon of it all, like the two books that I have about her, like not that a title necessarily means what the book is about, but both of the books that I've been reading about Hortense are just like, she was a mistress, where it's like, yes, she was a mistress, she was a runaway wife, and she also like did this cool thing. So at the salon, there was scientific lectures. She also had a museum-like culture, so you could like exotic objects and animals. So I don't know, some sort of petting zoo type situation, like looking like show and tell situation. And her bestie CM was a wine connoisseur, and he was especially a fan of the sparkling beverages from the Champagne region in France. He had French wine imported because he hated English wine. Hortense hated English wine. All the French people hated English wine. I'm sure they still do. And so she started serving champagne at the salon. And in fact, it was because she was serving champagne at the salon that champagne was introduced to English society. And again, she's the influencer, like she's the it girl. Like the same way that Catherine of Braganza came over and then everyone started drinking tea because she was drinking tea. Like Hortense had this like place everyone wanted to be. And what was happening there is everyone was drinking champagne. And so champagne becomes interwoven with like aristocrats, with socializing, with like celebrations. Like the reason why champagne is such a thing now in so many places all around the world, well, is because it was that in England, and then England colonized the world. But champagne. So like I want to give credit also to CM. He's the one who like brought it there. But then Hortense is the one who like made it the thing. You know, it's like when, God, what even is the thing now? But for a while it was like cronuts were the thing. Or I don't know, like frozen yogurt, like Aperol spritz, like any of the like the trendy thing that somebody does on TikTok or whatever, and suddenly everybody, or you know, it's like when you see a famous person, like anytime Meghan Markle shows up wearing a certain necklace, it's like that necklace sells out. Like Hortense Mancini was having the same effect, to the level of like the drink she served at her salon became the drink that everybody wanted to drink. So yeah, so I mean, and like a salon is a place, I don't know, it's like, it's such a place of festivity and enjoyment. Like it's not exactly like a bar type atmosphere, but people are just like, it's a party, like it's a party atmosphere. So like the whole thing of just like people having fun, holding up their goblets, like cheersing with their champagne. Like champagne just becomes interwoven with this idea of like celebration and like joy and partying. And side note, if you want to learn more about the history of champagne, there is a book called The Widow Clicquot by Tilar J. Medzeo. So the full title is The Widow Clicquot, The Story of a Champagne Empire and the Woman Who Ruled It. So it's a biography of, so if you know Veuve Clicquot is like a famous, expensive brand of champagne. Veuve Clicquot means the widow Clicquot, and so who was a person, and she was a #girl boss. And anyway, this book tells her story and how she got it all done. I'm using #girl boss because one of the reasons I found this book really interesting, but it's not going to be a vulgar history episode because she was, I don't know, her story is like very like businessy, and it's not very like scandalicious-y, but it's interesting. And I love knowing that, so I checked that book because I have a copy of it. I'm like, oh, does it mention Hortense? It doesn't, but it does mention CM and how he brought it over to England. Anyway, an interesting book. So yeah, and there's also sort of like a trickle down effect of what she does. Like again, like today's influencers, like first like a small group of people are doing a thing, and then people hear about it who's like the less popular people, and they start doing it, then the less popular people start doing it, and eventually it like trickles down. And then anyway, so it's this ripple effect of like champagne, but also like certain scientific trends or like a certain book or a play. Like it was, yeah, she was a Renaissance influencer. So the way that she dressed, people would copy. I don't know if they copied the Sailor Moon double buns, but presumably. Actually, I have a cute story, which is after I posted the first picture of Hortense on the Instagram when we started doing these episodes. A Tits with Brigade listener said, hey, I bet I could do that with my daughter's hair. And she did, and she sent me a picture, and it's so cute. So I think the Sailor Moon double buns is maybe the official hairstyle of Tits Out Brigade. Another option could be shave your head, wear a bad wig in the Christine of Sweden manner, or the Lord Farquaad blunt cut bob. Those are the three options we have, I think. Again, think about Vulgar History Con. Those are the hairstyles I expect to see. Not that that's happening, but, you know, maybe one day. Anyway, people are copying her outfit. They're copying her hairstyle. Although I do feel like that's similar to being like, oh, if you like buy this, whatever, you know, face cream, you'll look like this celebrity who like has a team, like a glam squad and hair extensions and like professional lighting and Photoshop. Like she was so beautiful and glamorous. It's like, well, I want to be like her. And the only way I can see to be like her is to just like, again, it's like the Meghan Markle effect again, where it's just like, I want to be like this person. So like if I buy this tote bag, I'll feel like them. Anyway, she was so beautiful. Everything she did looked great is what I'm saying. Were these things the reason why she looked great? No, like she was just inherently supernaturally beautiful. Anyway, so yeah, at the salon, like whatever authors were being discussed or scientists, like they became popular. The type of food and wine that she was serving became popular. And then again, of course, like the gambling thing. So like because people are gambling, other women started to want to gamble as well. Yeah, so over the next, even it's not just an immediate effect that like comes and goes like today's TikTok trends. It's like over the next decades, lots of other women set up gambling houses that they were in charge of. As Annalisa Nicholson says, so organizing things independently as a woman in the 17th century is an act of resistance against the general patriarchy, which often limits women to the domestic sphere. But Hortense was just showing like, what if you just like do this instead? So it's kind of like inspiring other women and other people to just kind of to try new things. Like I'm recording this as Beyonce's new album Renaissance just came out, which I love and adore, and I've been listening to it nonstop, and it's so good. But it's sort of like, I saw, it was another singer, maybe SZA, is that how you say that? I was saying just like what Beyonce did in this album makes other creative people think like, oh, like this is new, this is a different way to do things. Like it just opens up people's creative horizons to see someone doing something that no one else has done before. And so I think just seeing Hortense living this tits out life as like effectively an independent woman just made people think like, oh wait, like sometimes you don't know you can do a thing until you see a person doing that thing. So remember all this for the significance portion when we're eventually scoring her one day, because this story is not at the end of it yet. Yeah, so Hortense is running this like cultural hub, but again, like so much of the history written about her is like, well, she was the mistress of Charles II and she ran a gambling den, and like that's all you talk about. Where it's like, no, this is like a major situation. Also, just side note, again, I mentioned her pets earlier, more pets info. So Hortense there were animals at the salon, not just the like museum ones. So she had many cats and dogs. She also filled her salon with exotic birds, including parrots. Oh, and then here. So this is, sorry, my notes here say the sorts of like museum things people would look at. So like objects imported from the colonies. So like from the Western Hemisphere. So like ribbons, feathers, shells, brightly colored stones. Just always something new and fun to talk about. The salon itself, so it's not like her whole house. It's not just like it's not a house party situation. Like the salon was contained to 2 rooms, about 500 square feet in total. So a cozy, intimate space of just like buzzing with just like interesting people doing cool stuff. So at this point, Hortense, she's well into her 30s. She's been in London for like several years. She is in her 30s. She's flirty. She's thriving, and her story is still not over. Things are going to change pretty shortly, which is the death of Charles II. James takes over as king, so you know how we're going to talk about how does Hortense handle that transition. Is she able to still stay in the salon? Is she still able to keep her status as it girl? Also, like, what was her relationship with James's family? Remember his daughters, Mary from William and Mary, Anne the First. Like, what was Hortense? Was she cool with them? And then what we're also going to talk about next time is just kind of like her final years and what happened. And one of the things that happens is her oldest daughter flees her husband in France, comes to England to meet up with her long estranged mother, and we'll see what the fallout of all of that is. I think next week is going to be probably the final bit of the Hortense saga. I think we're going to get around to scoring next week. So next week is Hortense, the final years. And much like Christine of Sweden, like she did not stop being interesting. Fascinating things did not stop happening to her, which is interesting too. Like with Christine of Sweden too, it's kind of like, you know, she's trapped in this life that she didn't necessarily want. She fled that life, started something new, and now we're at a point where we can see like, what did she want that life to look like? And what she wanted to look like was just like independence, having a good time, intellectual stimulation, lots of lovers. I think it's also interesting. It was one of the first details about her as a young woman was her sister Marie was so in love with Louis XIV. And young Hortense was just like, romance, not for me. And it continues to not be. Like, I haven't come across anything that said that she was in any way seeking out the great love of her life or whatever. She just had lovers and was having a nice time. And I think that's great to see someone who's able to do that, if that is what they want to do. So yeah, if you go to, P.S. I wanted to let you know this. Also, as I'm recording this, I'm like a couple weeks ahead of when you're listening to this, but this week there's been some discussion about Prince William, which I keep thinking about how in the last episode I talked about how Charles had the yacht that he called the HMY Fubs after an affectionate word to describe a curvaceous woman and the nickname he gave his mistress. And I was like, haha, what if like modern day Prince William had a yacht and he called it like Thick? Anyway, so some stuff has come out about, some discussion has been occurring. There was a blind item about Prince William on Deuxmoi, which is DEUXMOI, the Instagram blind items page. I don't know. A blind item, I mentioned this before, I think, but it's like, it's a way that somebody can describe something that a famous person did, but without giving the famous person's name, so you can't be sued. So if I was doing a blind item about Hortense, I would be like, well, this Italian-born beauty was seen with her sister bathing in the river on a hot day in Rome, and everyone would know it was Hortense Mancini, but I never actually said it was her, but I gave like some clues to know it was her. But also you can't ever verify if it's true or not. And the minute that a famous person like refutes it, then that gives it legitimacy. So generally famous people just like ignore this stuff. So Deuxmoi posted a thing that mentioned that Prince William has a mistress, and it's like an open secret among people in like aristocratic circles in England or whatever. And there's also details about like the sex act he prefers, but that's not what we're getting into. What we're getting into is the fact that I was reading that just as I was doing all this Hortense stuff, and I'm just like, you know what? Like the way that Charles had it set up, where it's like, have a mistress, it's cool, no one minds, is maybe healthier for some people, rather than having to pretend. I mean, the same thing with like when Prince Charles was with Camilla, like having to pretend like he and Diana were married, but he had a mistress. It's like, let's just like have mistresses and like be open about it. Or if you don't want a mistress, don't have one. But just to like pretend like you don't have a mistress when like a bunch of people know you have a mistress, it's like, anyway. The connection I wanted to make as well is that, so Charles II had so many illegitimate children, and a lot of those children were given titles and whatever because they were like the illegitimate children of the English king. So unlike in France, where illegitimate children can or then could inherit the throne, in England it had to be the legitimate children, like the children of the wife of the king. So none of Charles's children could inherit, but they all went on to mostly pretty successful, privileged lives, and then kind of set up new, like rich, a whole bunch of wealthy families, right? So two of those wealthy families eventually combine, and that is Lady Diana Spencer, like Diana, Princess of Wales, was a descendant from, in two different ways, Charles II's illegitimate children. So the way that the British royal family goes is that like none of Charles's children took over. James, his children, so William and Mary took over, but they didn't have children. Anne the First had so many children, none of them survived. So then the crown went over to George the First, etc., over in Germany. So like the Stuart line ended with Anne the First. But in so doing, it means that when Prince William becomes the king of England, he's going to be the first Stuart, or the next Stuart monarch since Anne. And it's through his having been descended from Diana, who is descended from the illegitimate children of Charles II. Just a weird connection between Charles II and William during a week where I'm like researching an oldie times thing and all these moderny times things are happening. Anyway, that's just my historical fun fact for you. So if you go to vulgarhistory.com, please send me your feedback. I love to hear what you have to say, ideas for new episodes, corrections or whatever, suggestions. If you go to, there's the link in the show notes, but also if you go to bookshop.org/shop/vulgarhistory, and if you buy books through there, including the Widow Clicquot, or one of the books about Hortense, then a little bit of that money goes to support this podcast as well. And I mentioned there's a new Hortense's Salon merch at vulgarhistory.store. So you can get that. We've got mugs, we've got, stickers, t-shirts, different things. And you can always, for that or anything else on that website, use code TITSOUT for free US shipping, or TITSOUT10 for 10% off. You can support the podcast, which is me. Well, it's me and then Christina. There's an editor now, you might have noticed, and there's end credits now, and I credit the editor. So I've been wanting to have an editor of the podcast forever. Things worked out, and now Christina is on Team Vulgar History. So really excited about that. And things like that can happen because of the financial support of listeners like you. So patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. If you support me there for at least $1 a month, then you get early access to episodes of Vulgar History. For $2 or more a month, you get to vote on polls and things like that to help choose future subjects for the podcast. And then also, if you support me at least $5 or more per month, you can listen to the episodes of So This Asshole about terrible men. I'm going to be posting one shortly. Actually, it'll be there by the time you hear it. But about Cardinal Mazarin. And then from the poll results, I'm going to be doing one about Christopher Columbus. That's requiring a little extra research, so that's coming there later. And then also there's the Vulgar Peace Theater special episodes with me, Alison Epstein, Lana Wood Johnson, where we talk about costume dramas. The last one we did was The Girl King, a lesbian costume drama about Christine of Sweden. Next we're going to be doing Les Miserables, the Hugh Jackman, Russell Crowe version. Anyway, that's all on there. I love when people support me on patreon.com, but also the most important thing is you're listening to this right now. So thank you for listening for free. I also appreciate that, obviously. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Vulgar History Pod, on Twitter at Vulgar History. And yeah, next week is going to be the thrilling conclusion of this saga of Hortense Mancini. So till then, keep your pants on and your tits out. I'll talk to you next time. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Anne Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Sheshin Morachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you know what lies within nothing?
No.
Do you know where it ends? Do you want to know?
Yes.
Counterbalance, a high fantasy audio drama. Season 2, coming 15th of October 2023. Learn more on trilunas.com.